The Honourable Member Sue Moroni.
Thank you, Mr Chair, and it's a pleasure to rise and speak to the Royal Society of New Zealand Amendment Bill, Clause 5 in particular. But look, this is an organisation that I had the honour last evening of co-hosting the Speakers' Science Forum with the Royal Society of New Zealand, so it seems very fitting to be standing and speaking on their bill today. Last evening's forum, we talked about the square kilometre array and discovered that New Zealand is working with Australia leading a bid for winning that particular contract, which would be very, very exciting for New Zealand indeed. Certainly all of our fingers and toes are crossed for gaining that contract, which we will learn about in the course of the next year. But Mr Chair, I really wanted to speak about the interpretation part of this bill, which is in fact Clause 5, because this is a part, and I am a member of the select committee that considered this bill. It's a part of the bill that we did decide to amend. And it was interesting because when we looked at the definition of the word humanities, which of course is central to what this bill is doing, because just reminding listeners to this debate that fundamentally what this bill is doing is bringing humanities in and having it officially recognised for the first time, even though the Royal Society of New Zealand has operated in a way when it has recognised the humanities for some time now. This bill is actually bringing it officially into the recognition of the Royal Society of New Zealand. So getting the definition right is pretty important, pretty central to the entire bill and its purpose for being. So the Select Committee did move to take out some of the particular subjects that had been noted in the definition because they seemed to be a little out of kilter. So originally, the definition of humanities started off by recognising English and other languages. And as a select committee, we thought, well, that seems a bit out of place, really, doesn't it? Why don't we just talk about languages? Because that encompasses and doesn't give preference to any particular language, and I think that it was the right thing to do. But in reading it subsequently, I do wonder about other things that we have left out that I think do come into humanities. And putting all personal interests aside, I have been reflecting on the only tertiary qualification that I hold, and that is the Certificate in Trade Union Studies, Certificate in Labour and Trade Union Studies, in fact. A bit of a collector's item. Not many people, I imagine, listening to this debate will have that certificate on their wall because I really do hold it very proudly. It is a collector's item because this Labour and Trade Union Studies was really only in existence for about 3 or 4 years. So it's quite an elite qualification, in fact, because there's not too many people in New Zealand who hold this qualification, and I'm really proud that I'm one of those people. During the 1990s, this was unfortunately fell victim to the ideology of the national government at the time, and the University of Waikato felt that it could no longer continue to offer the Certificate in Labour and Trade Union Studies. Such was the ideology of the government of the day that it really needed to drum out any such notion, the idea of workers' rights and of labour studies, the study of workplace relationships as having any legitimacy in a university scenario at all. So it did cause me to reflect on why in this definition we give recognition as being the humanities, including media studies, for example, but not trade union studies, and not women's studies. Because I would think that at least if media studies gets to rate a mention in the definition of humanities, then perhaps some of these other issues, some of these other studies would rate a mention as well. And I certainly think in terms of my personal experience with gaining that certificate in labour and trade union studies, that it certainly did seem to me that it would fit under the banner and the definition of humanities, because of course that is exactly what we were studying. studying the impact of workplace relationships. We were writing. In fact, there was a very, Mr. Chair.
I call the honourable member Sue Moroney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My course in the Labour and Trade Union Studies actually published a book of oral histories about workers' rights and workers' issues in the workplace, and so we were published as a group of students, and I think that was something that improved the status of that particular period of study, and the certificate that, as I say, proudly hangs on my wall. I know that other recipients of that particular certificate kind of cashed it in, so to speak, to put towards as credits towards other qualifications and degrees. But look, I think I recognised even at that stage that this was going to be a collector's item, and I didn't move on to cash it in for further study, but kept that certificate of Labour and Trade Union Studies on the wall, and very proudly so. But it hasn't made it into the definition of humanities, and I think that's a great shame. However, I do want to support this supplementary order paper from Te Aroha Flavel, because of course if we are going to recognise cultural studies and law and classics and philosophy, history, religion, then it does make a lot of sense that we would recognise Māori studies as being within the humanities. And I want to just support both what my colleague Marion Street had to say about this supplementary order paper, and also Rahui Kātani, is that of course this does really locate in a way that having American studies did not locate this particular definition as being a New Zealand definition, a definition for Aotearoa. And I think I feel a little embarrassed now, having been part of the Select Committee, that we didn't spot that earlier, because we certainly did spot the anomaly of talking particularly about American studies and singling that out as somehow that was, elevated and somehow more important than any other study of any other nation or any other continent. And of course that should have caused us to think, and why didn't it cause us to think, about Māori studies being the obvious thing that was missing from that definition of humanities. Of course, this could have been a very, very long definition, and I think it was important that the Select Committee chose not to probably list every single one of our own personal qualifications under humanities, because that, I think, of course, would have caused some concern when we came to debate this in the Committee of the Whole House. Because I imagine if we'd sat down as a Select Committee and listed our own personal qualifications that would come under the humanities banner, we probably could have made this into a much longer clause. And however, I think in its current state, with the amendment from Te Aroha Flavel, it really does give enough of a full, if not a full roll call, then an idea of what the definition of humanities means when it comes to this this clause of the Royal Society of New Zealand Amendment Bill. Mr. Chair, I do look forward to hearing having a national member of Parliament get to their feet and debate this bill, particularly on this clause, to let us know how they will be voting. Because, I'm sure that even the Māori Party would be quite interested to learn about whether the national government is going to be supporting the supplementary order paper of Te Aroha Flavel. And in fact, I wonder if Rahui Kātani would be so good as to give us an indication about whether such a discussion has been had between the National Party and the Māori Party. So she's indicating that it has been held, and the National Party have indicated that they are supporting. Oh, and it's ongoing, Well, look, I think it would. I think it will. I think that the national MPs then might want to take some calls to ensure that the debate does continue for a good measure of time, so that they can come to a conclusion of this question, which is clearly vexing them, about whether to support the supplementary order paper of Te Aroha Flavel or not. Because I would hate us to get to the position of voting on this particular clause, Clause 5, before the National Party has had the opportunity to reach its conclusion, and what I'm sure will be a vigorous debate within the National Party caucus about whether they will actually support the supplementary order paper or not. But look, I've given Rahui Kātani the opportunity, and I really thank her for her frankness and honesty. But could we have an indication from perhaps the senior whip of the National Party about whether the government will in fact be supporting the SOP from Te Aroha level?